go live to Peter Dutton now. As Trudy was speaking, Peter Dutton started speaking. Let's see what he's got to say.
Of a Hilux to encourage somebody to buy an EV. I just think that's the reality of it. Well, I just think this government is presiding over a wish list of the union movement, which is driving down productivity. It's driving up unemployment. And as we know, under this government, real wages are down 7.6%. So it is no wonder that every time you go to the supermarket and you're paying more for your groceries under this government, you're feeling it doubly because not only have the prices gone up, but your wage effectively has gone down. And I think the government has all sorts of problems when they're putting the union bosses ahead of workers. And that's exactly what's happened under this government. And ultimately, the economy is going to suffer a significant downturn because we continue to lose productivity in the economy. Flexibility is fine for workers and we encourage that. But in the end, we have to be careful that the Albanese government just doesn't side with the union on every occasion because all that happens is if the price of wages go up too dramatically in an inflationary environment, you'll end up with much higher prices for consumers.
Rid of that. So you don't believe those people should be able to work from home?
Well, let's look at what the government's proposing. And as we've seen with legislation that the government's brought forward before on industrial relations, it's clear that there's always devil in the detail. We support flexibility, but we don't support driving down productivity and therefore an increase in prices that consumers pay. And every decision the Albanese government's taken so far has made it harder for consumers because the prices of everything have gone up. And I think Mr Albanese is so far out of touch with the Australian people when he proposes, in the middle of his cost of living crisis, to jack the price of a Hilux up by $15,000. It's not a sign of a Prime Minister who understands the pressure that families are under.
What's the message to Liberal members who want to expel Alex Hawke to reopen pre-selection Paul Fletcher?
Well, they're matters for the division.
The Coalition has accused the government of fast-tracking visas for Palestinians coming into Australia on visitor visas. They've granted more than 2,000 since October 7. When you were Home Affairs Minister, you granted 500 visas a week to Syrians, so that worked out to 12,500 in total. How is this different?
Well, a couple of points. Firstly, we know that the government has now had their 12th boat arrival, maybe 13, we're not sure. We know that a large hull vessel made it onto Australian mainland in northwestern Australia with something like 40 people on board, and it was undetected. The first the Prime Minister knew about it was when he was asked the question by a journalist, which is a catastrophic failure in our border protections. We know from the Border Force Commissioner that surveillance that's been conducted across the northwest and that approach to the mainland, that has been dramatically ramped down. So in one sense, it should be no surprise that boats are getting through on the watch of this hopeless government. Next point is we know that the government has released 149 criminals, 7 murderers, people who have committed sexual offences against Australian citizens, people who have committed domestic violence offences, who are non-citizens. They've been released from migration detention into the broader community, and we know that a number of those people have already committed additional crimes against Australian citizens. So if you think I'm going to take a lecture from the Albanese government on how to manage borders, it's not going to happen. When we were in government, we closed down detention centres. We got all of the children out of detention. We got women out of detention. We stopped people drowning at sea. We had an orderly migration program, including in relation to the Syrian intake, and women that we took in from the Yazidi community who were being slaughtered by ISIL. We took a decision in relation to those individual cases based on information, particularly from the United States, who hold the most significant intelligence holdings in relation to biometrics and the like. But in the middle of a war in the Middle East, where Hamas is running the Gaza Strip, the government's taken a decision to bring 2,000 people in from that region into our country, and they're approving people with one-day consideration of the applications. We don't know about the authenticity of the travel documents. We don't know whether these people are Hamas sympathisers. And I think the government needs to tread very cautiously here, because if you bring people in and they claim protection, they are likely on a pathway to permanent residency and therefore citizenship. And as we've seen with the level of anti-Semitism in our country, we don't want to be fueling that disgraceful activity. So we can bring people in a responsible way, but during the course of a war, when we're bringing people in, we don't know about their travel documents. The requisite security checks that we did when we were in government are not being conducted by this government, and they're approving people out of a war zone in one day to come here potentially on a permanent basis. It's no wonder that people, and right across the community, Australians don't trust the Prime Minister when it comes to managing our borders and keeping Australians safe.
What was the average approved time situation?
Well, I'm sure that was disclosed at the time, and I'm very proud to stand by our record. And if you look at the threat that those people have provided to the Australian community, given that we made those decisions a couple of years ago, we made the right decisions, and there were many people that we excluded. The problem is that this government can't accept people out of a war zone quickly enough, and I worry about the threat that poses to the Australian community. I'm sure there are many good people that are within that cohort, but I want to make sure that the Australian public is kept safe, and you don't do that by bringing 2,000 people in from a war zone in record time, like the Albanese government is doing at the moment.
Paul Keating's called for the top tax rate to be lowered from 45% to below 39%. Is that something you look at as part of your...
Well, Paul Keating's had a number of interesting things to say. He's spoken about the mistake that Prime Minister Albanese made in relation to the Voice. It cost Australians $450 million, and it divided our country, and it has not improved a single life in Indigenous communities when that is what every Australian wants to see as the outcome. So I think he's right to point out that the Prime Minister divided our country, that he wasted $500 million, money that could have been spent providing support to families, pensioners and others on fixed incomes as their electricity prices go through the roof under this government. And I think he's right to say that we do need tax reform. He's been very critical of the government in relation to their union-funded industrial relations push. And Paul Keating had the guts as Prime Minister to stand up to the union leaders. He helped modernise the economy, and he was supported by John Howard in opposition. The Albanese government is not like the Keating or Hawke government, it's more like the Whitlam government, and it's more like the Rudd and the Gillard government. And that's why families are really struggling at the moment, and that is why they cannot afford a new ute and car tax at a time when they can't afford to pay their electricity bill. And a Prime Minister who is proposing to jack up the price of a Toyota Hilux by $15,000 is completely and utterly out of touch with where Australia's tradies are and families and small businesses are at the moment.